Rivera, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and I'm an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God. And this program is centered around living free. It is my desire and my goal to help individuals and families and couples walk in freedom, live in freedom, and how to get on the track to freedom. I think there's so many things in our lives that can hold us back from walking in the freedom that Christ has called us to live in. You know, God's word said, Jesus said, whom the Son has set free is free indeed. However, a lot of times we don't walk in that freedom that he's already called us to. And so in my practice with my clients, I love to get them on track, get them going and walk in an area of whatever area of their life they're struggling in, get them moving to freedom. And today I want to talk about grief and loss. And particularly, I'm going to be speaking to those who maybe have lost a loved one, if you lost a spouse or a parent or a child. There has been a lot of loss over the past couple of years, just with everything that we've experienced in the pandemic and just life in general. It doesn't have to be related to the pandemic. You know, we live in a world where people are going to die. We are humans. And how do we walk through that? And I've been working with a lot of clients through grief and loss lately and just helping them move forward. Sometimes grief and loss is a place where we can feel stuck and we can feel like I can't move out of this. I don't know how to get out. And I think understanding grief and loss and that how it works and we manage it in our bodies and our mind can really help individuals be able to walk through it effectively and come out on the other side. And oftentimes it hits us, maybe for some of you, it happens suddenly. For some of you, you walk through a little bit of it because maybe your family member had an illness and it took some time. Doesn't matter. We're never really prepared for the death of a loved one. It doesn't matter if we try to mentally prepare for it before it happens. It's really hard to mentally and emotionally prepare for that loss. So when I'm working with clients, in particular, when they're coming into my office and we're talking about a loss of a loved one in their family and in their situation, I try to explain to them how grief works. Grief is like this visitor. When someone passes away, it just shows up. We don't want it to show up, but you can't choose whether it will or not. It's just going to show up. And the hard part about grief is when it first shows up and you're first walking through that death of that loved one, is grief kind of shows up and it just like moves into your house with you. It's with you everywhere you go. It's like this constant companion. And that's really hard for people to grasp and I know I lost my mom right after my son was born and she had cancer. So we walked through some of that I was pregnant when she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And then my son was born. And then 4 months later, she passed away. So even with that, I didn't fully prepare for what I was going to experience when I lost her. And when she passed away, it's like grief just whoosh, showed up on my doorstep with its bags packed and everything and just moved right into my emotional self in my home. And everywhere I went, grief tagged along. And that was really hard for me. And a lot of my clients, when they come in, they're just like, I hate this feeling. I just want it to go away. I just want to be able to just go do something and not have it be with me. And unfortunately, when you first walk through grief's going to be your companion and right next to your side for a while. And when we're walking through grief, and I always tell my clients, because it can come up unannounced and you could be somewhere and get triggered in a memory and you feel like you're just going to break down. You may feel sad and depressed, may feel a loss of interest in doing things and engaging with others. That is very normal when you are going through grief and loss. Okay, so sometimes I'm normalizing it for my clients and I'm saying, look, this is a pretty normal part of what you're experiencing, that you should feel more depressed feelings. You should be feeling just like not interested in things. And that's going to be there for a time because grief is now, it's moved in, it's right next to you. It's walking with you every part of your day. From the time you get up in the morning to the time you go to bed, it's right there with you. And that can be hard when we're not used to living with that on a daily basis. But one thing that's important, and I tell my clients in the first several months of grief, while grief is there attached to you 24/7, is you have to learn to set boundaries with grief. Otherwise, it will overtake you and you can move into a depression. So when we talk about what do you mean set boundaries with grief? Well, a lot of my clients, we just try to jump right in, distract. We want to do whatever we can so I don't have to deal with it. The problem is you can try to ignore grief and distract yourself, but it's going to be there and it's going to show up at the most inopportune time. So a lot of times I'm sharing with my clients, schedule time to grieve. And they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what do you mean schedule time to grieve? Well, you know what? Sometimes we have to accept that grief is now a part of us. It's there. And part of that acceptance is I need to schedule time with it. So sometimes I'm encouraging my clients, schedule out part of your day, whether it's 15 minutes to 30 minutes, maybe you need an hour, I don't know. You can sit with photographs of your loved one and just sit there and look through and think about the times that you had with them, the memories, allow yourself to cry. Maybe it is sitting there and it is listening to some songs and just recalling just some good memories that you had with them. It might also be sitting and taking time. Usually, I encourage you to do it privately. And then we'll talk about corporate grief when you're going to do it with family members and other people. But when you're doing your scheduled alone time with grief, you're really going to take that time by yourself, whether it's in your bedroom, your closet. I love my closet. Sometimes I would go in my closet, shut my door, and just sit in there and do some grieving. When my mom passed away, I now have a piano room that I love. I can close my doors and I will sit in there if I need to do any grieving or any processing or talking with God. So find a place that is comfortable, find a place that is private, because this grieving time, when you schedule that grief, you want it to be private. And you're just going to sit and use that time to contemplate and think about, the person. Think about what the loss means to you. A lot of times we think grief is just grieving over the past of that person and they're not being there in the present. But you're going to walk through some grief over the future. So I know for me, I didn't, I'm just trying to live. When my mom passed away, I just was trying to cope. And that's why maybe some of you are in that place where you're just trying to get up every day and live with it. But it's kind of this ongoing thing. And I remember grieving over just in those moments of I had my baby. I had this new baby my mom wasn't going to be a part of. She got to see my baby when he was born, and that was great. And I was so thankful that God allowed that. But she wasn't going to see me as a mom. She wasn't going to see me raise my son. She wasn't going to know my son. My son wasn't going to know her. That is grieving, and we have to grieve over those things. So when you're scheduling out grief, you're not just grieving over that present and that past, but you're going to grieve over the future. So now can you understand why you need to schedule grief? It has to be scheduled, or it's going to stay with you a long time. If you don't process grief appropriately and effectively, that companion of grief is going to move in with you and stay there for years. And that is not what we want. See, we want grief when it comes and moves with you. We want to give it some time limits. So I tell my clients, when grief first happens, that person first passes away, grief moves in, it's with you, it's staying in the same bedroom with you, it's in the same house with you. I mean, you can't get away from it. But if you process through and you schedule grief appropriately, what happens is eventually it kind of stays in their house with you. It's there, but eventually it moves out into a trailer in your front yard, which means it's not constantly your companion. You can go through things and you can do things and you're okay. But next thing you know, if it's living in your front yard in a trailer, next thing it's knocking on your door and just coming in quickly whenever it wants. And grief will do that, because as you're processing through and you're going through things, you should, if you're scheduling grief, walk through things, be able to pack away some of that stuff and feel okay at times. And a lot of my clients will say, well, how long? How long does that take? Well, it kind of depends. Depends on the relationship you had with the person. If you had a really close relationship and a healthy relationship, grieving should be more appropriate, because we can pack through if you're doing it with someone, if you need a little bit of help. If you've had a more strained relationship and it ended on kind of a weird place, that might take a little longer, and you probably are going to have to walk with a professional to help you work through that, or grief support system. There's grief support recovery groups out there. They're wonderful. And so it can depend. I really encourage my clients to get in. Let's get working on this. So within about 4 to 5 months, 4 to 6 months, we should have grief and packed through it, walk through it done some scheduling grief. So grief should now be kind of out in the front yard, getting ready to move to a trailer court down the street, because it shouldn't be affecting me on an ongoing daily basis. If you are in a place where you've had a loved one pass away and it's been 6 months, 9 months, a year, over a year, and you keep getting really, and you are really stuck and you cannot move forward, you may have moved into a chronic grief, which can cause depression. And you may need to, and well, I would encourage you to speak with a counselor, and you may need to figure out some other steps that you can take to help work through that, to get past that. Because at that point, it's now settled into chronic grief, which creates some depressing feelings and some stages of depression. But for normal grief, usually it takes about 4 to 6 months to have grief move out to the front yard in the trailer, and then it should start moving into its own trailer court down the road. And the reason why I give this analogy, because people want grief in a house, I'm done, and then it's moved 2 states away. And that is not how it works. Grief gradually will move out. And if you get that concept that it's first living with me nonstop, constantly, and then as I process and schedule grief and I work through those losses and the past and the present and the future, it starts to move out, and it should be in your front yard in a trailer. And then it just shows up. It can show up randomly. Remember, grief just will show up whenever it wants to. You can get triggered by certain things. And I remember about 6 months after my mom passed away, I was functioning much better, but I was at church and I was on the worship team, and we sang a particular song and I lost it. Grief at that moment just whoosh, showed right up on my doorstep, came right back into where I was. And that's normal. That is normal. You are going to have moments where grief is going to show back up randomly. And what happens is we continue and we process grief effectively, it starts to move out further and farther out, which is what we want. That's why I like the analogy of it starting to move out. And at some point, within maybe 6 to 9 months after the loss, grief should be down the road in a trailer park in its own place, and it shouldn't be showing up on a daily basis, but it may show up at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, and maybe those moments of triggering. And, I will sometimes be working with clients who do get stuck in chronic grief. And I had a client just in the past year that just was not able to move past her grief of the loss of a parent. And it turned into a chronic state of grief. And there was a lot of things she was trying to process through. There were some other dynamics going on with her other parent also. And she just was really having a hard time. So I did assist her in working through some things. And, sometimes people will have to get on a low dose of depression medication or anxiety medication while they're working through chronic grief, because chemical balances can occur when that happens. So you would want to talk to a professional and work with a counselor, definitely, and allow them to assist you in that. But as you're processing through that grief and scheduling time, and I think that's the hardest for us, is to literally stop, because we don't want to feel those feelings. And that's why a lot of my clients and a lot of people will not schedule grief, because they don't want to feel that feeling. And I understand that. I don't like it either. But if you don't schedule it, it's going to control you. And that's what we don't want. That's when it can move into chronic grief. You don't want grief and loss and that controlling and scheduling your life. You want to schedule it. You want to be in control of it. And that's why I talk about healthy boundaries with grief and how do I go about that. And that's why I encourage people walking through a significant loss, don't try to do it on your own. It's really hard. It's really hard to navigate those feelings. And sometimes family members may not understand what you're walking through. Friends, sometimes you might hear someone say, well, it's time for you to move on. It's just time for you to kind of get moving on with your life. And in your mind, you're sitting there going, I don't know how to do that. I agree. I want to move on, but how? And that's when you really need to partner with someone. And whether it's a professional, there are wonderful grief recovery groups in churches and places that you can check into and walk through that process with other people who are grieving. And they usually have a curriculum that'll help you walk through that. But you definitely want someone to assist you, because it's nice to have a partner and not just grief as your partner, because grief will be your partner for a while. But making sure you're scheduling that time out and walking through it. And then at some point, as grief moves into that trailer in your yard, then it moves into a trailer court. hopefully down the road if you're processing correctly and it's a couple miles away, so it's only showing up randomly. Eventually, it's going to move another city away. So hopefully our goal is within about 9 months of the loss, 9 to 10 months, grief should now be another city away. So it's only showing up at certain times and it will show up randomly. Sometimes you can guess when it's going to show up, sometimes you can't. My son was 5 years old and we were going to kindergarten and I had processed through a lot of my grief with my mom and that, but I was triggered. I'm taking my son to kindergarten. I'm watching these grandparents walk with their families and these little kids walking to kindergarten and I lost it because grief just showed up. I wanted my mom to be one of those to walk with me and walk my son to kindergarten. And it dawned on me again, here was a whole new place for me that my mom wasn't going to be able to get to see my son in his little plays and get to go with me to pick him up from school and to go to all these events. That was another part. You see how grief and loss is not always done. It can still show up, it just moves further out. So I did have to go again. Here came grief, came from a state away, came back into my home, and I had to visit with it for a little bit. I had to sit down with grief and process through. I forgot about all this future stuff. I forgot about school. I forgot about the longing and desire. Yeah, I see these grandparents walking kids to school. I forgot. So I had to invite grief back into my home. I had to sit down for a couple days with grief, process through it, and then I was able to say goodbye, and grief went back to its place a state away, a city away. It wasn't quite a state away yet, a city away. So you can see how grief and loss is one of these things that for years can just show up. For years can just randomly come in and another time that grief and loss will maybe just randomly show up after you've experienced it for a while is when something significant happens in your life, a big change, a big, maybe you lost a parent before you got married and you didn't even realize. And so here you are getting ready to get married and that thought comes in, oh my goodness, I'm not going to have that parent at my wedding, or birth of a child, or a big, promotion or whatever it is. If it's your child, you're going to walk through these losses of, oh my goodness, my child will be going, you're going to see other people's children doing these things and you're going to walk through grief quite a bit. It's a little bit different with the type of loss you have. For those who've lost a child, unfortunately, grief probably doesn't move too far away for a while. Grief may be parked out in your front yard in a trailer or in a trailer court down the street for a while because there's multiple things that come up with a child of these, with starting school or a challenge or a change in school, watching your friends' kids do something that your child could have and would have done. So it depends on the loss and the type of loss you've had on how grief and when grief moves away and how far it moves away and how frequently it comes back. So you can see why it's really important to partner with people who can help assist you in that, because it is challenging and you can see how chronic grief can set in and how it can quickly turn to depression if you don't know how to move past it and move beyond it. And usually it turns into that because we don't sit with it. We want to quickly just push it out. I know, I don't like it. I want to push it out quickly too. But if you learn to have a healthy relationship with grief, you will invite it in, you'll sit with it for a period of time, and then it's ready to say goodbye to it at the door. And I'll see you whenever you show back up, grief. I'm ready for you to walk out now. I thank you for stopping by and we process this. Now it's time to go. I'm a visual person, so when I look at things like this, it helps me process it better. I'm not sure if you're a visual person. Some of my clients, that visual gives them an idea of like, yeah, that's what it feels like. And I'm working with some clients right now who've had some major significant losses. And then if you're walking through complex grief is when you've had several losses that you didn't get a process through and you've had multiple on top of another. And those can be traumatic and difficult as well. And you really need to walk with somebody through complex grief because that one can easily turn into depression and turn into chronic grief. And those are hard. And a lot of my clients, didn't learn how to deal with grief and loss when they were younger. Now, right now, I'm getting to work with some teenagers. So I'm getting to help lay the foundation for how they will deal with grief in adulthood. It's really hard. It's hard walking with a teenager who's lost, a significant parent, someone close to them. But I appreciate the fact that I think it's an honor to be able to work with them because I get to teach them. So when they go into adulthood, they don't have to have chronic grief or complex grief down the road. They can learn at an early age when the brain is much more receptive to learning things, how to process through the grief and loss. But as adults, most of you probably have never learned how to work through grief and loss because maybe your parents didn't know how to process through it. Or maybe an adult, you just never saw the model. Maybe no one walked through a significant loss in your life. And so now you're just kind of randomly just trying to figure it out. And those are really hard when you're randomly trying to figure something out that you've never walked through. And this is why you need to partner with somebody. Partner with somebody who can help and assist you and help you schedule that time to grieve. And some of my clients, I will have them do what's called a memory collage. I have one in my house upstairs on my mom. After my mom passed away, I went through quite a few pictures and I ended up getting this large frame that I was able to put multiple pictures. I picked some of my favorite pictures of my mom and I began to piece it together. It was very therapeutic for me because as I put these pictures together, you see, I walked through some grief. I was able to grieve over some things that, the past, and also some thoughts about the future, things I missed about her. You see, sometimes we don't think about the routines that we miss. Did you call that parent frequently that you lost? You see, there's a loss right there in your routine. See, I would always call my mom when I was driving to work. I worked across town in Phoenix, and every time I was in the car, I'd give her a call and I'd talk to her for about 20 to 30 minutes. So you see, my life, my schedule got changed when my mom passed away. I didn't get to call her every day. I didn't have that 30-minute call with her. That was really hard. For those of you who lost a spouse, think of the routine you're grieving, the daily little things that you did at breakfast or lunch or dinner, or the text messages, the calls. You see, there is a lot of grief you walk through. And this is why I tell you, when you lose someone, grief comes in and moves into your house with you and it becomes attached to you. And if you don't schedule it, you don't work through it, and you don't learn how to set boundaries with it, it will overrun you and it will take over and it will lead to depression later. And we don't want that. We want the healthy boundaries with grief. One of my favorite scriptures, and I'm going to pull it up here on my phone, is in Psalms. In Psalms 34, and it says, sorry, I thought I highlighted it, but I didn't. Okay. Yeah. Oh, there it is. It says, you know what? The Lord is close to those who are a broken heart. So, when you have that broken heart, that God, He's close to you. He wants to be there for you. He's there when you're grieving, He's right there with you. So isn't just grief attached to you? You see, God's attached to you too. God wants to be that companion that's closer to you than anyone else. And God is close to those who are brokenhearted. And it says He rescues those who are crushed in spirit. And I don't know, maybe you're walking through a time right now that you feel crushed in spirit because you're grieving over a loss of a spouse, a child, a parent, a significant, relationship. And you're feeling crushed in spirit and you feel like, God, where are you? I feel like you've left me. Well, He hasn't. And one of God's name is El Roi, which is means the God that sees. And God sees you and He's there for you. He's Jehovah Shammah, the God is there. And maybe you just need today to say, God, I need you to help me through this because I'm really struggling and I don't know what to do with this loss and I don't know what to do with this grief. And I feel like I can't go one more day. I don't know what I'm doing. And you know what? God's right there. He's going to move right in. He's going to come in and He's going to take over because He's close to those who are crushed in spirit and have a broken heart. And maybe today you don't know Christ. Maybe you don't have a relationship with Him. Maybe you've kind of moved away from God. Well, you know what? It's really easy. All you have to say is, God, I need you. I need you. I recognize that I am a sinner. I need Jesus, your son, to come into my life as my Lord and Savior. I believe he is the Son of God, and I need you to come in and rescue me. I want to serve you. I want you to be a part of my life. I want you to cleanse me. I want you to make me whole because I need you. I need you. It's that simple. And if you did that and you prayed that today, you know, God's right there with you. He's right there. He's already moved in and he will help you work through the grief. I know I could not have walked through the loss of my mom without my God because I had this new baby. And you know, when you have life going on, you can't just stop. I couldn't stop taking care of my baby just to sit with grief all the time. So God helped me. God helped me work through that loss of my mom while I was parenting this newborn. And you know, without God, I don't know how people do it. But you see, with God, he's your strength. He loves you. He cares about you. He's right there. He'll never leave you. And he wants to walk with you through this difficult time. And I just want to say a prayer of those today who are grieving. God, I pray for each and every person. Those who are watching or listening today that have lost someone close to them, that they feel like they can't even get up. They feel like they can't move through the day. They feel like they can't go on with life. I pray, God, that in this moment that your supernatural peace will flood over them and cover their heart and mind and raise them up. And Lord, that you will resurrect in them a new joy and a new zeal for life, a new peace. And Lord, that you will bring a comfort to them. Lord, that they will feel your presence on them and over them, and that you will break all of that grief off of them and you will raise them to new life. And I just thank you for joining me today. And I just pray God's peace over you. I hope this helped you move forward today, walking in freedom, living in freedom, because that's what God has called you to do. And I pray God's blessings over you. And thank you for joining with me today in Living Free.